Hello, I'm Paul Edmondson, President of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Like many longtime Washingtonians, like many visitors from across the country and across the world, I have a deep appreciation of the National Mall Tidal Basin as one of our nation's most significant cultural landscapes. Until our current time of social distancing, I joined the millions of people descending to see the cherry blossoms in their glory, and have also been a frequent visitor on summer bike rides and walks. But also, like most people, I've focused on the beautiful setting and not necessarily on the crumbling pavement beneath my feet. The truth is, the tidal basin is an endangered cultural landscape. Subsidence, daily flooding, and failing infrastructure threaten this important site. That's why the National Trust for Historic Preservation has teamed up with the Trust for the National Mall on the Tidal Basin Ideas Lab presented by American Express. This is not a design competition, but a collaborative forum to explore innovative solutions to the many complex threats facing the tidal basin. During the current pandemic, the memorials to American ideals and the beautiful landscape of the tidal basin remind us that as a nation we've overcome incredible challenges in the past, and we will overcome this one as well. Our historic sites and cultural landscapes reflect our own resiliency, and even in ordinary times, they serve as places of comfort and inspiration. Today, I'm honored to introduce a panel discussion among principals from the 5 landscape design firms participating in the Tidal Basin Ideas Lab. Each firm has its own approach to designing bold, provocative, and creative solutions to preserve, enhance, and revitalize the tidal basin. The resulting designs will be part of a curated digital exhibit paired with events to engage the public in the work of the Ideas Lab and the future of the tidal basin. So without further ado, I'm pleased to present this opportunity to explore new ideas to ensure the future of this important national treasure.
So I'd like to now introduce our panel moderator, Edward Krekmelnikov, who is the Director of Public Engagement Programs at Trust for the National Mall, an organization that we've been working with so closely on this Ideas Lab. Edward?
Thank you very much, and thank you to our presenters, advisors, and everyone who is joining us now or at some point in the future. I'd like to reintroduce our panelists, and as I do so, please turn on your webcams and unmute your microphone. Welcome back, Catherine Gustafson from GGN, Walter Hood from Hood Design Studio, Gary Hildebrand from Reed Hildebrand, Susanna Drake from D-Land Studio, and James Corner from Field Operations. We have just 15 to 20 minutes and much to discuss in a very short time. I'll start and conclude with a pre-prepared question and may interject from time to time, especially with questions from the audience. But more than anything, this is a platform and a forum for the panelists to discuss amongst themselves and ask each other questions. There's no set order, so whoever wants to respond first can do so, and I'll keep track of the time. To begin, the first question: how do we think of historic preservation in the face of profound uncertainties, especially climate change? Will the idea and practice of preservation have to change? And whoever wants to go can go. No pressure.
Well, a part of the reason that I shared the kind of history of the evolving landscape was to talk about how there are many sort of important moments that happen in relation to sort of certain periods in history, and that preservation is tricky because you have to figure out kind of what moment to preserve. And when we're looking at a landscape that is an evolving thing, and it's always changing, we I think we have to reflect a certain level of dynamism, right, in that landscape. And I guess, you know, part of my thinking is that sort of understanding what was there hundreds of years ago with the sort of channels of the natural landscape is as important as kind of the cultural elements that have developed over time, and that somehow, as we move forward, we need to be figuring out the integration of those elements. So, and that's kind of where we started with our design. You know, trying to draw upon as many of those factors as we could, but ultimately understanding the power of nature.
You know, Edward, there's been 30 years, 40 years really, of really good work in preservation in landscape architecture. We've all watched it and we've all participated in it. We've situated ourselves at varying distances from it sometimes. But I think the guidance doesn't go far enough when we're looking at a class of historic assets that are truly threatened and simply cannot remain in place. And the guidance really doesn't provide for the ability to migrate things outward. As we've all suggested today, this is needed. And so I think, you know, this may be that, you know, the so-called rehabilitation framework that is set out in the guidelines simply has to evolve in some of the ways that we've shown today.
I think also to add to that, that I think there's two things that are going on. One is a physical thing, and then one is interpretive. And I think in all the different pieces, the importance of the interpretive is, I think in Walter's, it was specifically very much an interpretive piece. The reason you put a memorial is to memorize and memorialize, and it is interpretive. And so the preservation of the memorial, but then how is that preservation projected through time and space and through communication, I think needs to be part of it.
Yeah, this is Walter. I think another way to think about preservation is to also think about letting things go. I mean, I was particularly taken by Jim's, what he called the melancholic, but this idea that maybe we do have to let certain things go to actually begin again. And this idea of the constant maintenance, right, of an idea that defines us. When I say us, I'm talking about the US. And maybe it's time that we begin to chip away at that. And can we chip at it in a way that one holds it up through a kind of a romance with the ruin, but also beginning to think about what those new monuments might be in concert with them? Because I think this idea of holding things in time doesn't allow those new
right now.
For us to come together in this country, you know, whether it's, you know, as Gary pointed out, where we are today, you know, in this crazy time, but maybe there's a way to begin to think that origin story here in DC. And so, Jim, I would say it's not that dystopian for me. I actually found that a nice revelation.
Yeah, I think the Europeans have addressed preservation issues in a more advanced way than we have in the US. Yeah, I mean, 20 years ago, they were trying to simply reproduce the historical artifact. So whether it was a cathedral or a castle or a ruin, they would try to add on to that or fix it in exactly the same technique. But now they've realized that whatever they do today needs to be of today. And there needs to be a very clear trace or a very clear legibility between the original and the change. So this issue of authenticity is key. And so if the monuments are to become ruins, then that process of ruination is part of the spectacle and part of the time. If there are new amendments to the landscape or to structures around those, then those new amendments, in a sense, need to reflect the time that they're built, designed, and built today, which is today. And I think this collage or this bricolage of the original with the new insertions, the new graphs that we add on today, and whatever comes tomorrow, is what I think preservation should be aiming for, an authenticity of time instead of a sort of simple reproduction of an idea of history.
I don't think anybody is suggesting a reproduction of history. I think the existing monuments are there, and they exist, and any new monument or new landscape will be of its time, one would hope. And I don't think there's any suggestion about going back to historical and doing Macmillan Plan or something else. But I find that I work in Europe a lot, and I know this, what you're talking about, James, is the new has to be new and the old has to be old, but you still fix the old, by the way. You don't just add new, you do fix the old. And so I think here we have the old and we need to preserve them, and then the new does have to be of that timeline. But I just want to make that distinction.
And a follow-up to that, if I may, what is the symbolic nature of the tidal basin, and how does that overlap with its practical utility? That is, what is the symbolic, what does the tidal basin mean, and how do you interpret it over time? It's a big question.
It means many, many things.
So it wasn't.
There's no single narrative.
It wasn't built with any intentionality for symbolism or even recreation. And then later, it became a great symbolic landscape, especially with the cherries coming from Japan as a gift, and that's reaching out to internationalism. And then more recently, it's become a sort of recreational landscape where families come and enjoy the place as if it's a kind of a recreational landscape. So the tidal basin has had a variety of identities, if you will, from infrastructure to symbol, to kind of monumentality, to soft recreational uses. And I think, as Walter was pointing out, which I found very interesting, there's a lot of very, very different cultural narratives here, as well as very, very different cultural perspectives. It makes it very difficult to pin down in a paragraph, you know, the meaning of the tidal basin, because it really does mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Yeah. But you could say the same about the mall. I think, you know, that we have a kind of national narrative of how democracy is represented in the mall, beginning with L'Enfant Plan. Susanna went through quite a lot of that. We have to question all of that. Some of that is just based on, you know, untruths and really, really questionable, you know, ascendancy to power for the United States in the 20th century. And, you know, this is our time. We question these narratives. And so if anyone would propose a singular narrative, Walter's project is an artistic view of the opposite of that. It's multiple narratives, many experiences. And if we don't make this tidal basin about many narratives, we've really missed the mark.
But in a way, that's what I find the interesting thing about America, right? I mean, actually, if you read the landscape, you read the history of this country, right? From colonial to imperial, that's ingrained in the landscape. You can understand the cultural history of segregation in this landscape. You can understand a lot of things. You can even understand globalization, you know, how, you know, again, America kind of reaches out in different ways. But I just think we need to be good storytellers. And I think that's something that I do believe in the landscape, we can tell those stories and we can create these kind of places of disjunct, that things don't always go together. I mean, to me, that's the thing that I'm more interested in. You know, when these things kind of come together, then allow us to talk about them. When we create them more congruent, that allows us to sort of not talk about things. So.
And are there any questions you have for each other, anything that's bubbled up during the process or the last few months that you've been curious about and wanted to ask the group?
It's good to see you guys.
I know.
Always,
It would have been
always.
nice to have more interaction.
Well, you know, one would like to think that maybe there is another level of interaction, Susanna, and I just think we have placed a very big feast on the table at the National Trust and the Trust for them All. And I think maybe you could use our help in unraveling that and kind of recreating the menu, because there's so much here. It's not an easy thing.
I think there is a discussion between the five of us about the built and unbuilt, and that there's, you know, the disparity between the projects is really about the built and unbuilt, and whether it's it is a constructed landscape. It is definitely, you know, with its, you know, floodgates, and it is a constructed landscape. But it doesn't look constructed, right? It kind of looks like the opposite of the mall. It looks like more easygoing, it's more open. I think somebody talked about it as more free and less constructed. But then should we actually be bringing in new hard constructions, or is that, I think there's a real debate there about, no matter what we do, we're going to have to do something, right? Or we just let the whole thing flood, which is the opposite. But just how far do we go in construction as an advisory group to say, yeah, it should become this new monumental piece like James proposes in his last proposal, or should it be something that there's part of it's constructed, or more like Gary's saying, there's not, it's just a landscape that's raised and moved. And, you know, we've all come up with different ideas, and we can give them all to a client and say, you decide. But I think we're here to be an advisory group and to have a debate about it. And as far as environmental and how much resources we're using, how much resources are we building, and then are we actually know where we're going, because we're only going to the end of the century. And so are we creating new structures that are going to have to be saved later? I think there's a debate on that level. Or did I just put my foot in my mouth?
I think it seems sort of inevitable that with DC under the sort of flood hazard that it saw just a few years ago, and the projections that, you know, what it's going to see in the near future, but there's going to have to be something built along the edge of the Potomac, whether that's an earthwork or a wall, a straightforward levee, or whether we design that levee in such a way that it becomes parkland and it protects the city. And the investment that the politicians make isn't simply to create a beautiful park, but is really for infrastructure to protect the city from billions and billions of dollars of damage. So, you know, there's sort of an intelligence in all the different approaches that we've seen today toward trying to fix the bigger problem in the ways that perhaps engineers could do simpler and maybe a bit cheaper. But at the same time, we fix the problem, we can also make something very, very beautiful and very...
What we can to accommodate.
I think that's the value of all of these 5 speculations and the exercise in and of itself. But at the end of the day, you have to convince some pretty, I don't know what to call them, some pretty stubborn politicians as to why it's worth spending tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to fix the resiliency issue that DC as a whole is facing. The tidal basin is just a portion of the larger challenge here.
I agree, but there's
maybe
also,
I think.
sorry, I'm gonna just say one other thing here. I think also there is, James, there's economic analytic of what you're going to lose in tourism or gain in this. I think that the peninsula, I call it the peninsula, I don't know what its legal name is, the point, just if we somehow grab that piece of land also and also raise it up, you could have an economic balance with that. You could have more parkland with it. I think going into the broader scale of things and looking at them, and maybe part of this, Edward, this think tank, is somebody should be doing the economic numbers. You know, like how much development can you do? How much are you going to lose from tourism? What are you going to gain? You know, make it a reality, even if it's spread over 100 years. But somebody's got to run the numbers. You can't just take projects like this to people and say, fund it. Well, what are we funding and when? And you know, so there's a reality check to that. Sorry, Suzanne.
Oh, not at all. No, that was a better follow-up. I was going to kind of divert a little bit. So, because I think one of the big issues is that Washington D.C. is representative of the United States, or at least it's supposed to be, and that the elected officials are operating there, but they're representing the ideas of their constituencies across the country, and that there are a lot of issues. Happily, D.C. is placed at this interesting position. It's not directly coastal, it's on a river, and represents a landscape that is a happy hybrid because of that. And so some of the strategies that we're proposing here in this hypothetical laboratory could potentially be useful to those representatives from Ohio and Colorado and Wisconsin, or Alabama, whatever, all across the country. And one of the things I thought was really important was something that Gary and I were sort of touching on it very lightly, was the idea of a regional approach, because the regional development of this landscape is really the major contributor to the flooding that's happening in DC. Yes, we have climate change, but that's leading to these increased storms. And with these increased storms, we've engineered those surrounding landscapes and DC for the 10% storm, and now we're getting the 10% storm much more often. We now have to kind of change the economics of our engineering systems and change our approach to regional design in order to sort of get back in and protect our cities. And so it's representative of a much larger issue. And if we can use this as a way to highlight some of the things that decision makers might be able to do in their cities, in their regions across the country, then I think we might have more power. So
I want to agree with all of that. I want to agree with all of that. The economic and the political issues that Jim has raised. The potential for this to be a model across the nation is what Suzanne is saying. But I am still interested in, I think, what the two trusts, in a way, brought to us, and then allowed us the freedom to, in some ways, ignore it, which is that in all of this, because there are so many assets, we all work on coasts, so much of our culture, our patrimony is at risk right now, that we have to evolve preservation practice. And I think that debate with this team of really amazing advisors and some really good designers is the way to move that forward. I'm really hopeful that we can continue to do that.
Thank you, Gary. And we have time just for one or two last comments. The last question I was going to ask, but you spoke to it, was what are the benefits of the Ben Hockenheimer used as a precedent? As opposed to
Sorry,
a design
can
competition.
you
Benefits
repeat
of the
that?
lab format?
Sorry,
Yeah.
as opposed to a design competition, what are the benefits of the Ideas Lab process that you participated in?
No winners.
Well, it's not a competition because there's nothing to win. But, you know,
Exactly.
that this is a this is just purely speculative to begin a process around which the issues here might be taken seriously by the powers that be, and that monies and funds might be allocated, and that's really the big challenge. And so I think the work we've all produced is to try to precipitate and increase more awareness around the issues here, and to try to get a sense of urgency, and to also at the same time see the potentials and get excited about the potentials for this. And maybe one day there'll be funding and it'll be a real project and we'll all be competing aggressively. But right now it's really been a largely pro bono effort to take a very significant national important symbolic landscape, speculate on alternative scenarios, but at the same time try to raise political and cultural and social awareness of the issues, if not desire also for real change.
And
Thank
I
you.
would say
And we have time
I love.
we have time
Oh.
just for one last comment, and then we'll conclude.
Well, I really appreciated that it was a platform that could enable more ideas. I brought it to my studio at the School of Environmental Design at the University of Colorado Boulder, and it was incredible what the students were able to do. They come from all over the country, and we had sort of parallel efforts. And you know, I think that working on this for them really enriched their views of the country and of the capital and of ideas of democracy, but also ideas of how we move forward in terms of how we interact with the environment. So it was just a really incredibly valuable experience. I'm just really grateful to have been involved, and also grateful to have been, you know, working with all of you.
I just want to say one last message. I think when you talk about going out to the public and what this brings the public, it's kind of simple. Either you lose it or you keep it, right? Either you lose an entire area that is for the city, that is recreational, is environmental, and can be part of the memorials, or you're going to lose it. I mean, it's as simple as that. And so I think that a lot of people are going to be very happy to keep it. And so, and they're going to have this group of 5 have come together to show you all different ways to hold on to it. And so I think that's a good message. I mean, we're all saying, yeah, we need to hold on to it, but kind of how? Yeah. So lose it or use it.
Or another way to say it is that you can lose it and it can be very powerful. Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
until
I
you
think,
try
I mean,
to go
for me,
out jogging.
I mean, I think the losses, I mean, I think what the projects show, though, that there is something beautiful about the loss because you gain a lot versus always trying to hold on. And I thought there are a lot of ideas there about losing because that's part of life. We got to get used to it.
Yeah, but it's losing and regaining at the same time, right? It's not just losing completely. Anyway, I think people will want to build it. I really think people will want to build something to preserve and to have a space that does environmental and does cultural. You know, they all work, you know.
I wish we could continue the conversation for probably hours to go, but we've just hit the clock here, so we'll have to conclude now. On behalf of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the Trust for the National Mall, thank you, each and every one of you, for all of your effort, your profound knowledge and expertise, and your vision for sharing that today. and in the past meetings. Thank you to our advisors for their assistance along the way, and thank you to everyone listening in. Please stay tuned in the coming months as we continue to build on the Ideas Lab, the future announcements and events. This has been an absolute pleasure for us. We have many ideas yet to explore and much work to do and much building to do. So thank you all so very, very much, and take care.
Thank you.
Imagine
Thank you.
thunderous applause.
Bye.
Oh, bye. Lovely seeing you all.
Cheers.